It started with the wind, not the kind that rustles through leaves or knocks a flag sideways, but the kind that makes your skin go cold, even on a warm day. I felt it long before the weather reports said anything. Call it intuition, or the leftover instincts of a man who's seen too many things ripped apart without warning. I didn't need a radar to tell me the sky was turning on us. My name's Thomas Granger. I'm 47 years old, a retired Air Force meteorological technician, and a widowed father of one fierce, bright-eyed girl named Emma. We live, or lived I should say, in a suburban neighborhood called Cypress Run, nestled right in the heart of Oklahoma, Tornado Alley. People here think they're prepared. They put their faith in insurance policies, concrete basements, and those little phone alerts that come 10 seconds too late. Me, I trusted steel. I trusted sound. I trusted the siren I bolted to the side of my garage. It wasn't just any siren. I designed it myself. After losing my wife to an EF3 that touched down outside Tulsa 5 years ago, I couldn't sleep at night knowing how little warning we had. Emily was driving home with groceries when the sky opened up. They found her car upside down in a ditch, crushed like a soda can. I'd begged her to leave 10 minutes earlier. 10 minutes could have saved her life. So I made it my mission to never lose another loved one to that kind of randomness. I studied storm behavior, tuned my equipment, and when we moved to Cypress Run last year, I made sure to bring the siren with me. It wasn't pretty, it looked like something out of a Cold War museum, but it worked. Loud, piercing, impossible to ignore. And that's exactly what got me into trouble. 3 days after I mounted it, I got my first notice from the HOA. It came in a manila envelope taped neatly to my door. The edges lined up so perfectly, you'd think a machine did it. Inside was a letter typed in bold serif font. Violation notice, exterior modification without approval. Dear Mr. Granger, it has come to our attention that a large, non-conforming device has been affixed to your home without prior submission to the Architectural Review Committee. As per the HOA Guidelines, Article 4, Section 3, no external structure or equipment may be installed without express permission. Please remove the offending object within 72 hours or face daily fines of $150s. Sincerely, Karen Whitfield, President, Cypress Run, Homeowners Association. I remember reading it while Emma sat at the kitchen table coloring a weather map I'd printed out for her. She looked up and asked, "Is the HOA mad about the storm siren?" "Looks like it," I muttered, folding the letter in half with one hand. Emma tilted her head, her ponytail swinging. "But it's to protect people." "Yeah, baby," I said. "Not everyone thinks that far ahead." I didn't take it down. Of course I didn't. The way I saw it, I didn't need permission to protect my child. And more importantly, I'd reviewed the county codes before installing it. The HOA had authority over cosmetic modifications, paint colors, mailbox design, lawn length. Not safety infrastructure, especially not when the siren was covered under state emergency preparedness exemptions. I had the paperwork to back it up. But that didn't stop Karen Whitfield. If you've never met someone like her, count yourself lucky. She had the face of a Stepford wife and the heart of a security checkpoint. Everything about her was tight, her bun, her cardigans, her voice. She knocked on my door the next day with a clipboard in hand and a rehearsed smile. "Mr. Granger, I'm sure you received our notice. I did," I said, keeping the screen door between us. "Then you understand you're in violation of HOA standards." "I'm not," I replied calmly. State Code 41.3.9. Emergency preparedness installations are exempt from HOA aesthetic rulings so long as they don't interfere with shared property. Karen's smile didn't twitch, but her eyes narrowed just enough to betray the shift. "You sound like a lawyer." "No," I said, "just a man who reads." "Well, regardless, the board voted unanimously that your siren is disruptive. It creates an industrial eyesore. This is a residential neighborhood, not a weather station." I stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed. "Karen, we live in Tornado Alley. That siren could save lives." She waved a hand, dismissive. "That's what the city systems are for. We don't need panic-inducing noise every time the wind shifts." "It's not for every breeze," I said, trying not to raise my voice. "It's calibrated to trigger only under verified NOAA alerts. It won't go off unless there's imminent danger." "That may be so," she replied, "but your neighbors have already filed 3 complaints. Let me guess, the same neighbors who still have plastic flamingos on their lawns in violation of the same handbook You're quoting." That cracked her facade. Just a flicker. "You have 72 hours, she said, turning sharply on her heels. That night, I double-checked the bolts. Then I backed up my calibration logs, printed out a copy of the city's building exemptions, and prepared for the next battle. I didn't know it yet, but we were on a countdown, just not the kind she thought. And as I tucked Emma into bed that night, she looked up at me with sleepy eyes and asked, "Will the siren wake me up if something's wrong?" I kissed her forehead. Only if it has to. But if it does, we run to the shelter, just like we practiced. She nodded, trusting me with everything in her tiny heart. The wind outside shifted again. This time I felt it in my bones. The next morning, a second envelope appeared on my doorstep. This one was thinner, but somehow more threatening. It was certified. Inside, a cease and desist letter, drafted by the HOA's legal representative, a retired paralegal named Dennis Malloy, who still wore his old courtroom badge clipped to his belt like it meant something. The letter repeated the same points, just with more legalese: public nuisance, unauthorized structural addition, and my personal favorite, creating undue alarm within the community. I chuckled bitterly at that one, as if warning people about a tornado in Oklahoma was undue. That evening, I sat in the living room with Emma, trying to help her with a science project on weather patterns while rereading the letter by lamplight. I had the storm radio on low in the background. A warm front had stalled just south of us. Nothing urgent yet, but the meteorologists were starting to watch it. It would develop like they always did this time of year. Then came the knock. This time, Karen didn't come alone. She had two other board members with her, Dennis, of course, and a tall, quiet man I later learned was her neighbor Jim, who served as the HOA's security and ordinance enforcement liaison. Basically, he patrolled the block twice a week with a flashlight and clipboard, hunting for weeds and unapproved porch decorations. "Mr. Granger," Karen said curtly, "we're escalating this." I opened the door wider, leaning against the frame. "Still haven't read the state codes." Karen held up a thick printout. "Actually, we have. And we've contacted the Municipal Code Enforcement Office. You're going to be cited. The HOA has jurisdiction over any non-conforming architecture, especially equipment mounted on home exteriors." Dennis piped up, "And if you refuse to comply, we're authorized to begin daily fines and seek court-ordered removal." I nodded slowly. "Okay, then I guess I'll see you in court." Karen narrowed her eyes. "You're really going to drag this whole neighborhood into a lawsuit over a siren?" I looked over her shoulder at Jim, who was holding his phone up, likely recording. "No, Karen. I'm trying to keep this neighborhood alive." She scoffed. "This isn't about storms. This is about you playing soldier, trying to make yourself feel useful with your little weather toys. This is a community, Mr. Granger, not a military base." The words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I saw Emily's face again, in that crushed car eyes, wide hand still gripping a loaf of bread she'd never get to put away. I stepped out onto the porch. "You want to find me," I said, my voice lower now, but firm. "Do it. But when the sky goes black and people start looking for warning, they won't be knocking on your door." Karen didn't flinch, but Jim's eyes flickered. "We'll give you 48 hours, Karen said, turning. 72, Dennis corrected, technically. Karen shot him a glare and stormed off the porch. 2 days passed. I kept the siren bolted down, checked it each morning. My phone lit up every couple of hours with a new notice of violation from the HOA email system. At one point, they even uploaded a picture of my house to the community app with the caption, "Non-compliant structure, action pending." Emma saw it and asked, "Are we in trouble?" "No," I said. "We're being responsible." "But why do they say it's bad?" "Because some people care more about looking perfect than being safe." On the third day, I got a letter not from the HOA, but from the city. It was brief, form letter, and it crushed me. "Dear Mr. Granger, upon request from the Cypress Run Homeowners Association, your recent exterior installation has been reviewed by the Code Enforcement Division. While your equipment is permitted under Oklahoma Title 74, your installation has been deemed in violation of neighborhood-specific compliance ordinances. Due to easement proximity and HOA contract stipulations, the city cannot protect your installation without a court injunction. Please remove the siren within 24 hours or be subject to municipal fines." My hands shook as I folded it. HOA politics had reached the city, which meant Karen had friends in the council, or worse, influence in code enforcement. It wasn't about safety. It was about control. I called every office I could, got voicemail boxes, left messages, no reply. That night, I turned the siren on, not to sound it, but to test it. The lights blinked in sequence. The test tone ran quietly for 2 seconds, just enough to confirm it worked. I ran my diagnostics, all green. Then the knock came again. This time, it wasn't Karen. It was a young man in a yellow city vest, holding a clipboard and a removal notice. He looked about 25, nervous, unsure. "Sir, I'm just here because I was told to issue this in person." I took it from him and nodded. "You know what this is about." He glanced back toward the HOA office, at the edge of the cul-de-sac. "They said your siren is disturbing the visual harmony of the neighborhood. And you?" I asked. He hesitated. "My grandma lives on 12th Street. We got a minute warning last year because of a siren like yours. She made it to the bathtub just in time." He handed me the clipboard. "I'm sorry, sir." Then he left. Emma watched from the window. "Are they taking it away?" "No," I said softly. "Not yet." But I knew they would. The next morning before sunrise, I caught 2 hired contractors in orange vests trying to climb onto my garage. The HOA had sent a private crew, not city workers, to forcibly dismantle the siren under emergency violation enforcement. I stepped out with a camera already rolling. "You're trespassing," I said. "This is private property. You touch that siren and I'll have you both arrested." They looked surprised, but didn't stop. "I'm calling 911, I said loudly. That did it. They climbed down and left. But that wasn't the end of it. At 4 p.m., while I was picking Emma up from school, they came back with a locksmith and a uniformed HOA officer. The siren was gone by the time I pulled into the driveway, bolts stripped, wiring cut, pieces left in a pile by the curb. There was a note on my front door. "Siren removed for non-compliance. Fines suspended upon dismantling. Please maintain proper exterior aesthetics as per Cypress Run standards." Signed, Karen Whitfield, President, HOA. Emma found me on the curb an hour later, staring at the pile of twisted metal like it was a body. "Daddy," she asked. I didn't answer, because somewhere deep in my bones I felt the wind again. But this time it wasn't just intuition. This time it was coming. By the time I gathered what was left of the siren from the curb, the sky had already begun its shift. The kind of shift that only certain people notice, people who've spent their lives watching clouds for lies. People like me. The air had grown heavy like it was pressing down on your skin, and the clouds were forming that ugly green tint you never see in paintings, but always hear about in survivor interviews. The local news was still calling it a system to watch, but I knew better. This wasn't just another dry cell pushing through. This was the beginning of something mean. I spent that evening quietly repairing what I could from the dismantled siren. Not to reinstall it, there was no time, and the HOA had made it clear they were watching, but just to salvage the internal components. The wiring, the microcontroller, the external sensors. I didn't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was desperation. Emma sat on the floor beside me, still in her school uniform, tracing her finger across the radar map on my iPad, like she'd seen me do. "Daddy, that red part's moving toward us." "I know, sweetheart," I said without looking up. "But the TV says it'll miss." I stopped, looked at her. "Do you trust the TV or your gut?" She pointed to her chest. "Gut." I smiled faintly. "Good girl." The wind had picked up by 7:30 p.m. Most of the neighbors were still outside, oblivious, watering lawns, chatting in driveways, grilling as if the pressure in the air hadn't shifted at all. The HOA newsletter had gone out an hour earlier, cheerfully announcing a patio planting contest for the upcoming weekend. Not a single word about the storm front. I saw Karen walk by with her designer dog and wave at the Petersons, who were setting up tiki torches. "Enjoying the calm before the storm, Mr. Granger," she called out with a smug smile. I didn't answer. I just stood on the porch, arms crossed, listening to the hum in the wind. I pulled out my phone and called the only person I knew in city meteorology, Rick Santos, an old Air Force buddy who now worked in Tulsa's Emergency Management Division. "Tom," he answered, surprised. "You okay?" "I need your eyes on something," I said. "The front pushing east doesn't feel like it's tracking right." He sighed. "You always did get jumpy this time of year." "I'm serious. It's got signature swirl already. Pressure just dropped nearly 12 millibars in the last 90 minutes here." He went quiet for a beat. Then, "All right, let me pull it up." I waited while thunder grumbled far off in the distance like a warning from some ancient god. "Jesus," he finally muttered. You're not wrong. That thing's matured in the last 2 hours like it's fed off jet fuel. You got a shelter ready. Always. He lowered his voice. The city hasn't issued a warning yet, but you need to be ready. This one's twisting. Maybe fast. Got it. Tom, he hesitated. That neighborhood of yours, y'all got a system-wide alert. Nope, I said. HOA pulled my siren 3 hours ago. Of course they did, he said bitterly. Tell Emma I said hi, and tell her to get that helmet on. I hung up, looked at the horizon. There it was. A dark smear like bruised smoke low and long against the sky. I'd seen it before. I hated how familiar it looked. Like something that had followed me home from Emily's death. I turned to Emma. Sweetie, grab your go bag. Helmet, flashlight, and walkie, now. She didn't argue. She was my daughter, after all. Down the street, the neighborhood remained oblivious. I saw couples sipping wine on porches. Kids riding scooters. Someone playing music too loud, the bass thumping against the stillness like a challenge to the sky. I tried one last time. I walked to the HOA bulletin board near the clubhouse and pinned a handwritten note. Storm warning. Serious front moving in. Take precautions. Stay near shelter. Thomas Granger, former Air Force meteorological tech. It was still there 15 minutes later, torn in half, dangling. Karen must have seen it. By 9:15 p.m., the thunder was no longer distant. The air vibrated. You could feel it now, not just hear it. Pressure dropped again. Even Emma looked uneasy. Daddy, we're going down now. I grabbed the emergency radio, our bug-out bag, and led her down into the reinforced crawl space I'd retrofitted beneath the garage. Concrete slabs, ventilation, water. Food for 2 days, flashlights, extra batteries. I'd built it with the same precision I used back in Kandahar when storms of another kind used to hit us. As I closed the hatch above us, I heard one final echo from outside. A long, drawn-out groan metal on wind. A fence falling or a roof. Maybe the first sign. Then everything went black. Not the kind of black where the power cuts out and you can still see vague outlines. This was the black that comes from outside the world itself when the sky opens and says, you didn't listen. And then, the sound hit. It wasn't a roar. That word's too romantic, too familiar. It was a scream. The scream of 1,000 walls being ripped open at once. Of air pressure collapsing so violently, it made your ears pop and your lungs seize. It felt like being inside a jet engine. Or maybe the throat of a god, angry at how smug humans had become. I clutched Emma against me in the shelter, one arm around her head, the other gripping the beam I'd bolted into the concrete for this exact reason. She was shaking her breath fast. We're okay, I whispered. We're okay. Above us, the world was coming apart. The tornado had arrived. When the shaking stopped, it didn't end with silence. It ended with absence. An absence of sound, of movement, of everything that had been just moments before. I remember thinking, this is what death must feel like, a perfect, deafening quiet that wraps around you like gauze. Emma's breath was shallow against my chest, and for several seconds, neither of us moved. Then drip. Just a faint one somewhere in the corner of the shelter. And then a second one. The metallic tang of pulverized earth and insulation floated through the air vents. It was the kind of smell you never forget. Broken pipes, torn concrete, and ripped open lives. I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark like a knife. You okay, Em? I whispered. She nodded against me but didn't speak. I helped her sit up and passed her a bottle of water, watching her hands tremble as she unscrewed the cap. We did everything right, I said. You did perfect. I waited another 10 minutes before opening the hatch. What greeted me wasn't my garage. It wasn't even the twisted remains of a roof or shelves or drywall. It was sky, wide, brutal, and gray. Where my house had stood, there was now only shredded lumber, shattered glass, and pieces of insulation fluttering like ash. The siren I'd installed was nowhere in sight. Not even the bolts in the wall remained. The tornado had taken it all along with the smug facade of Cypress Run. I helped Emma up and out of the shelter. She clung to me as we surveyed the aftermath. The Petersons' home gone. Only the brick chimney stood leaning awkwardly, like it couldn't decide whether to fall or surrender. The Braddock's SUV upside down a quarter-mile down the street, its roof caved in. The clubhouse, obliterated. Its once pristine white columns were scattered like matchsticks. The fountain Karen had installed for 18,000 of community funds, now a crater half filled with muddy water and roof tiles. I turned around in a slow circle, trying to orient myself, trying to find something, anything familiar. But everything was gone. And then I saw her. Karen. She was sitting in the middle of the cul-de-sac in her white pantsuit, now tattered and smeared with blood and dirt. Her hair was undone. She clutched a clipboard, that damn clipboard, like it was going to save her life. She looked up at me. Her face was hollow. "You tried to warn us," she said, voice dry as dust. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Behind her, Jim was limping toward what was left of his garage, calling out names. I couldn't tell if anyone was answering. The sound of sirens, real ones, emergency ones, finally came rolling over the horizon. But they were too late. They were always too late. I helped Emma sit on a relatively clean slab of concrete while I moved through the wreckage, checking on whoever I could. Most people were dazed, cut, bruised. A few were unconscious. I pulled 3 neighbors out from under collapsed door frames. One of them, old Mrs. Leland, just kept whispering, "I didn't hear anything." There was no sound. No sound. That part hit me like a punch to the chest. There was no sound. Because the siren was gone. Because they took it down. Because they listened to Karen and her damn obsession with property values and neighborhood tranquility instead of basic human instinct. I found the remains of the siren by sheer luck. It was twisted, half buried in mud near the retention pond. The horn was shattered. The mounting brace snapped in 2. But the core sensor, my custom-built barometric trigger, was still intact. I held it in my hand like it was a heart cut from a body still twitching. Back at the concrete slab, Emma sat watching quietly. She was shivering despite the warm, humid air. "Dad," she whispered, "did anyone else go down below?" I knew what she meant. "No," I said. "No one else had shelters." A long silence passed. "Why didn't they listen to you?" I crouched beside her. "Because sometimes people don't want the truth. They want what's easy." She looked up at me with a seriousness too old for her 10 years. "You're not going to let them blame you, right?" I touched her shoulder. Not a chance. By noon, FEMA agents had begun to arrive. Police set up perimeter control. Ambulances were triaging on the spot. Drones buzzed overhead, mapping the destruction. News vans pulled up their anchors, solemn-faced, already preparing the unexpected tornado devastates quiet neighborhood angle. And then a reporter approached me. "Sir," she said, "I heard you had a private storm siren system set up here." I hesitated. I had one. "Can we speak on camera?" I looked down at Emma. She nodded. So I spoke. I told them everything, how the siren had been in place for months, how I'd submitted my documentation, how the HOA had forcibly removed it mere hours before the storm, how I'd tried to warn everyone, and how they had chosen to ignore not just a man with experience, but a father trying to protect his daughter. I ended with this, and this wasn't just a natural disaster. This was a man-made disaster. People died not because the storm came, but because we silenced the one voice that tried to warn us it was coming. By the next day, the clip had gone viral. It aired on 3 national news stations. It sparked a county-wide investigation. The pressure was rising again, but this time it was political. Karen didn't show her face the next morning. I heard she'd been taken to the hospital suffering from a concussion and some cracked ribs. Jim resigned from the board via email. Dennis, the self-proclaimed legal expert, deleted his HOA records from the cloud, but not before the community's tech-savvy teen Dylan Carter backed them up. People began to whisper. Then the whispers became angry voices, and those voices demanded answers. This time, I wasn't the only one sounding the alarm. The day after the tornado, the smell of wet plaster and splintered lumber clung to everything. Even with the sky now calm and blue above us, you could still hear the hum of generators, the hiss of propane tanks, the crackling of walkie-talkies, sounds of a community trying to remember how to breathe. But no one was really breathing, not yet. I walked past a crumbled brick wall where a woman was kneeling beside her cat's carrier holding the broken door in her lap, like she thought she could will it back together. Across the street, 2 kids kicked at insulation tufts scattered like snow, neither speaking. And in the center of it all, the HOA office stood, or what was left of it. The front half had collapsed into a mound of paperwork and shattered window frames. A bulletin board was impaled by a stop sign, and the flagpole bent in half like a pen snapped in rage. It would have been poetic if it hadn't been so devastating. Emergency crews had started setting up temporary tents at the local school gymnasium a few miles north, offering shelter food counseling. FEMA had deployed within 12 hours, a miracle by bureaucratic standards. They'd brought in drones, high-resolution mapping equipment, and worst of all, media. But the media was working in my favor this time. By then, my interview had hit over 2 million views online. They clipped the part where I said, "This wasn't just nature. This was negligence. People outside Cypress Run were paying attention. They were angry, and they had questions." That morning, I received a call from a woman named Dr. Helena Brooks, a legal advocate with a nonprofit that dealt with HOA overreach and property rights abuse. She introduced herself quickly like someone used to speaking before she could be cut off. "We'd like to offer you pro bono support," she said. "We think what happened here is not just tragic, but criminally preventable. And it's time someone fought back." I agreed without hesitation, because I'd already started documenting everything. I gave her access to my cloud folders, every video, every letter, every voicemail left by the HOA, including one where Karen explicitly called my Siren a liability against the HOA's reputation. Helena whistled when she heard that one. "We'll file a preliminary negligence complaint this week," she said. "We've seen HOAs fined before, but never after a natural disaster of this scale. This could set national precedent." That night, the emergency town hall was held in the only remaining public structure still standing, the community church. Its roof had partially peeled back like the lid of a soup can, but the walls had held. And in that hollowed-out space with no functioning air conditioning and only 2 working microphones, everything finally boiled over. I sat near the back with Emma, who clutched a juice box someone from the Red Cross had handed her. Around us were dozens of neighbors, some bandaged, others with glass still in their hair, all wearing the same numb expression. Councilman Wright from the city stood up front, fidgeting with his clipboard. His voice cracked on the first words. We are heartbroken over the losses suffered here in Cypress Run. This tornado took 11 lives, destroyed 53 homes, and left hundreds without shelter. Our emergency response teams acted as quickly as truncated 8,003 characters, Lying, I suspected, but from sleeplessness. Karen always struck me as the type who thought of remorse as a performance, something you wore until people stopped being mad. "I can't undo what happened," she added. "But I'm stepping down. The board has already nominated new leadership." "Too little, too late," I said finally. "I know." She turned to leave. But just before she reached the car, she said something that caught me off guard. "Do you know what I remember most from that night?" I said nothing. The silence. It was so total. I kept waiting for something, anything, to tell me to run. But there was nothing. Not even a bark. She got in the car and drove off. And somehow, that last part haunted me more than anything. Not the destruction, not the denial, but the idea that when the moment finally came to pay attention, the world gave her nothing. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I finally understood her. Karen hadn't been evil. She'd been scared. Scared of change, scared of losing control, scared of the unknown. And when fear leads, ignorance follows. That night, I sat with Emma in the shelter, not because there was another storm, but because she asked Topao. "It feels safe down here," she said, leaning against me. "It is," I replied. "Are we going to stay here forever?" "No, baby. But I'm never taking this apart. Even if they say we have to." I smiled and kissed her forehead. No one says that anymore. The wind rustled faintly outside, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Now it was just wind. It started as whispers. Soft murmurs at the hardware tent, subtle comments during volunteer shifts, people cautiously asking the same thing in different ways. Did the HOA really block the siren? Is it true the board ignored storm warnings? Why didn't we know the siren was removed? But as the days passed and the funeral services mounted, those whispers sharpened into voices. Sharp, angry ones, and soon after, those voices became letters, emails, petitions. A neighborhood that had once prided itself on quiet conformity had finally woken up, and it was furious. It wasn't just me anymore. The survivors were now speaking loud and clear. At first, the focus was Karen. Her name appeared in every post, every local newspaper headline, every complaint filed with the city. They called her the Queen of Compliance, the Tornado Denier, even the Silencer in Chief. But as the dust settled, the real target shifted to something larger, the entire HOA system. Because it wasn't just Karen who failed us. It was every board member who voted with her. Every clause in the CCHOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions that enabled this kind of silencing. Every signature on the bylaws that allowed aesthetics to trump safety. By midweek, a group of residents organized an emergency recall committee. They went door to door with clipboards and screenshots. Emma and I watched from the porch as people walked past the old clubhouse site carrying binder signs and righteous rage. Mrs. Braddock, who had nearly lost her son in the storm, became one of the most vocal leaders. At a neighborhood meeting held inside a repurposed shipping container with folding chairs and a whiteboard, she stood before the entire community and held up a picture of her living room reduced to splinters. This, she said, voice shaking did not happen because of wind alone. This happened because people in power thought safety was ugly. This happened because we trusted people who valued perfection over protection, and that ends now. Applause thundered. For the first time since the tornado, I saw something stronger than anger: unity. The community voted unanimously to dissolve the current HOA board and install an interim panel of 5 residents, none of whom had any prior involvement with the HOA leadership. I was nominated. I declined, not because I didn't want change, but because I knew my fight wasn't internal. Mine had already gone beyond the picket fences and front porches. I had something bigger in mind. I was working with Helena Brooks to expand the lawsuit, not just against the Cypress-run HOA, but against the national legal framework that allowed HOAs to operate with such unchecked authority in the first place. She called it the Granger Initiative. I wasn't sure I liked the name, but I understood the purpose. Our claim now involved wrongful death, negligence, and civil suppression of emergency infrastructure. That last one was new crafted specifically in response to what had happened to my Siren. But the court wasn't the only place this battle was being fought. The media had fully latched on. Local outlets gave daily updates. The footage of my torn-down Siren became a symbol. The still shot of the broken horn buried in mud was shared thousands of times. National news picked up the story. I was interviewed by CNN, then NPR. FEMA administrators visited in person. And then something I never expected happened. I received a phone call from the governor's office. Mr. Granger, a woman said, Governor Rayburn would like to extend an invitation. He's requesting your presence at the Emergency Response Reform Summit next month in Oklahoma City. He believes your story represents something we all need to hear. I blinked. You want me to speak? Only if you're willing. I said yes before I could overthink it. A week later, I stood in front of state legislators, emergency response directors, and community leaders from across the region, holding the shattered sensor module from my old Siren in one hand. I told them about Emily, about the Siren, about Karen, about the silence. And when I looked up, I saw heads nodding. Tears even. I ended my talk with this. No HOA should have the power to silence a warning that could save lives. No family should have to bury their child or their parent because of a rule about visual harmony. Safety isn't ugly. It's sacred. And if it makes a few fences less symmetrical or a cul-de-sac less picture-perfect, then so be it. Because I'd take a noisy neighborhood full of survivors over a silent one full of ghosts any day. A standing ovation followed. I felt something shift that day, not just in legislation, but in me. For the first time since Emily died, and certainly since the storm, I felt like I was no longer screaming into the wind. People were hearing me now. Back in Cypress Run, the new interim board passed the first emergency amendment in HOA history that guaranteed residents the right to install storm sirens, weather sensors, or shelters without approval. It was voted in 98-2. I knew who the two were, and I didn't care. The city followed suit, then the county. The movement was spreading. And through it all, Emma stayed by my side. She'd started drawing again, weather maps of course, but also houses with sirens, families running to shelters, storms in the distance, with bold black arrows labeled danger. In one of her sketches, she drew our house what it used to be, but on the roof she added a golden siren beaming light into the dark sky. I looked at her and asked, "What's that light?" She grinned. "It's for the next town, so they know when to run." I didn't realize I was crying until she handed me the drawing. Cypress Run wasn't perfect. It never had been. But now it was awake. And it had learned the hardest way possible that silence isn't safety. It's surrender. The courthouse in Tulsa wasn't built for stories like mine. It was built for traffic violations, noise complaints, and minor civil disputes. Nothing like this. Nothing involving 11 lives, a community in revolt, and a lawsuit that had become the centerpiece of national debate about HOA overreach. The hallways smelled faintly of floor wax and mildew, and yet somehow everything felt too clean for what we'd come there to do. I wore the same suit I wore to Emily's funeral. Not because I wanted to relive the grief, but because I needed to carry her with me when I spoke. Emma helped me press the cuffs that morning. She was staying with Mrs. Braddock during the hearing, but not before slipping a drawing into my jacket pocket. A siren, still golden, still shining. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras off, but their pens already moving. Karen sat across the aisle with two attorneys, neither of whom could hide the way their shoulders tensed every time Helena Brooks shifted her weight beside me. Helena looked sharper than steel, her expression unreadable, as she tapped a yellow legal pad against her thigh. The judge was a calm, aging man with soft eyes and a reputation for loathing sensationalism. He'd been assigned because of his distance from HOA politics. Neutral ground. "Mr. Granger," he said, adjusting his glasses as I took the stand. "You understand that you're here as a key witness in the matter of Granger versus Cypress Run Homeowners Association." "I do." "Proceed," he said to Helena. She stood, voice even but clear. "Mr. Granger, for the record, can you state your profession?" "I'm a retired Air Force meteorological technician. I served 16 years specializing in weather pattern analysis and emergency forecasting systems. And after your wife's death, I hesitated just long enough for the silence to mean something. I built my own early warning system, a private siren designed to activate only under National Weather Service tornado alerts. You installed this on your property?" "Yes." "Were you ever informed by the city that it violated local codes?" "No." "I submitted the design to the city engineer's office for review. They signed off under the state's emergency preparedness exemption. And yet the HOA issued fines. Yes, several. Followed by a cease and desist. Then they forcibly removed it. Do you have documentation of this removal?" I pulled the photo packet from the folder Helena handed me earlier. "Yes." "These were taken the day of the storm after the siren was dismantled by HOA hired contractors." Helena handed them to the judge. He studied them for a long moment. One in particular, a photo of the twisted frame lying in the mud, lingered in his hands. "Mr. Granger," she continued, "can you tell us what happened the night of the tornado?" I took a deep breath. The forecast had begun to shift around 4 p.m. Pressure was dropping fast. I'd been monitoring the system all day, and it wasn't behaving like a typical spring front. I called an old colleague, Rick Santos' Emergency Management Division. He confirmed the signature spiral forming. We both agreed a tornado was likely. "Did the HOA issue any neighborhood-wide warning?" "No," I said. "They were planning a planting contest." Karen laughed at the idea of an alert, and the siren was no longer operational at that time. "Correct. They'd removed it less than 24 hours earlier." "What did you do?" "I got my daughter Emma into our storm shelter. We waited it out. When we came out, the neighborhood was gone." Helena paused. "And if the siren had still been active?" I let that question hang in the air. Everyone in that courtroom already knew the answer. It would have bought them time. Time to reach shelter. Yes. Time to get out of bathtubs, out of bedrooms. Time to run. Even 30 seconds matters in a tornado like that. A full minute can be the difference between life and death. Helena turned to the judge. No further questions. Karen's lawyer, a round-faced man named Mitchell Langford, rose slowly. "Mr. Granger," he said, smoothing his tie. "You were aware, were you not, that the siren you installed was large and visually disruptive to the neighborhood's architecture?" "I was aware that it wasn't decorative," I replied. "And were you made aware of the HOA's requirements regarding structural conformity?" "Yes. But I also knew those requirements don't override state law in matters of emergency preparedness. So you knew you were defying the HOA's aesthetic code." "I knew I was protecting my daughter." Langford didn't like that. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Let me ask this another way. Do you believe your neighbors were responsible for the deaths that occurred?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked at Karen, her eyes fixed on her lap, her hands clenched. "I believe silence was responsible," I said. "And the people who enforced that silence are now answering for it." Langford huffed. No further questions. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Granger, one last thing. Why didn't you just comply?" "Because compliance," I said slowly, "would have cost me my child." He nodded. "You may step down." As I returned to my seat, Helena squeezed my arm, once firm and brief. The rest of the hearing moved in a blur. Expert witnesses testified. City code officers explained how the HOA had no authority to override state-approved emergency devices. The parents of one of the children lost to the storm gave testimony so gut-wrenching that one of the jurors had to excuse herself. The ruling came 3 days later. The court found the Cypress Run HOA liable for gross negligence and suppression of emergency warning infrastructure. Karen Whitfield and 2 board members were found individually liable for reckless endangerment due to documented obstruction of safety measures. The decision sent shockwaves across the state and beyond. The HOA was ordered to pay restitution to every affected family. But more than that, the judge included a ruling that no HOA in the state of Oklahoma could override approved emergency systems, period. Karen left the courtroom without speaking to anyone. Reporters tried to corner her outside, but she disappeared into the back of a black sedan and didn't reappear for weeks. A few months later, I heard she moved to Arizona. Helena and I, meanwhile, were already meeting with advocates in other states, Texas, Missouri, Kansas. Legislators were taking notice. Policies were being rewritten. The Granger Clause, as one state senator jokingly called it, was being drafted into real law. I didn't care much for the attention, but I cared deeply about what it meant. One afternoon, Emma and I returned to our rebuilt home. The structure was new, stronger, more modern, but it still sat on the same old foundation. I'd rebuilt the shelter too, expanded it, reinforced the door with a triple lock system, and added extra water storage. The Siren. That was back too. But this time it wasn't just mine. It had been installed with city approval, paid for by a fund raised by the community. Every house had a receiver now. Every block had a system. Safety was no longer optional. As Emma and I stood on the porch that evening, watching the clouds shift and swirl as they always had, I asked her what she wanted for dinner. She pointed up at the Siren and grinned. Something loud. I laughed. For once, I welcomed the sound. If the court ruling was the hammer, the weeks that followed were the aftershocks, steady, loud, and impossible to ignore. Karen Whitfield's name, once synonymous with control and order in Cypress Run, had become a byword for negligence. A local satire blog even coined the phrase pulling a Karen to describe any HOA decision that prioritized aesthetics over actual survival. And the fallout wasn't limited to headlines. The State Attorney General's office launched a formal investigation into Cypress Run's HOA finances after discovering that more than $84,000 in discretionary funds had been spent on cosmetic improvements, custom signs, imported planters, even a $12,000 fountain pump, while $0 had been allocated toward emergency preparedness storm shelters or community evacuation plans. Turns out the HOA had also vetoed a city-offered incentive to co-fund a communal siren system years earlier, an offer that Karen personally blocked, citing noise pollution and unnecessary public expense. The news of that buried proposal made it into every paper. Karen tried to issue a statement through her lawyer. It was filled with all the expected language: deep regret, community tragedy, misunderstood intentions. But it was too late for polished words. The town had already turned the page. The interim board called for a full audit. That audit uncovered more skeletons, poorly managed funds, manipulated ballots from past elections, conflicts of interest with vendors. It was a mess. And the more people dug, the more they realized how long they had let Karen and her inner circle operate unchecked. Denial had become a neighborhood tradition, but not anymore. Karen officially resigned from all positions 3 days before the state moved to suspend Cypress Run's HOA charter entirely. Yes, the entire HOA was dissolved. By unanimous vote, the residents chose to abandon the traditional HOA structure and replace it with a Community Emergency Resilience Board, a rotating panel of volunteers whose only responsibilities were neighborhood safety, infrastructure, and education. No more fines for lawn heights. No more paint color police. No more silencing sirens. And as a final gesture of transformation, the residents gathered what was left of the HOA's old sign, splintered wood and weather-warped letters, and ceremonially burned it during a community gathering in the rebuilt park. I stood with Emma near the back, watching the flames reflect in her eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. I didn't have a perfect answer, but I had a real one. Now I said, we remember what almost cost us everything. She held my hand a little tighter. At the same gathering, something else happened, something I never expected. Karen came. Not through the front entrance or in the middle of the crowd, but quietly from the edge. No Lexus, no clipboard. Just her standing beside a crumbled tree stump, watching the flames in silence. Some people noticed. No one approached her. Until I did. Emma looked up at me surprised. "Are you sure?" "I need to," I said. Karen didn't flinch when I walked over. She didn't make eye contact either. I waited a few seconds before speaking. "I didn't expect to see you here." Her voice was faint. Neither did I. "You know they voted to remove your name from every record, even the meeting minutes." "I know." A long pause. "You didn't come to apologize, did you?" She finally looked up. "No, I came to witness it, to feel it." "Feel what?" "The cost." I nodded. "Then you understand." She blinked back something that might have been a tear, or maybe just smoke irritation. "I was wrong," she said. "Not just about the siren. About everything. About what it means to be a neighbor. I wanted to hate her. Wanted to say something that would sting, that would make her flinch the way her decisions made people bleed. But I didn't. Because it wasn't just Karen who had to change. It was all of us. So I said the one thing I knew would hurt more than condemnation. "I hope you rebuild something better." She nodded slowly, and then she walked away. No camera crews, no farewell speech. Just a woman fading into the night like a ghost finally letting go. After the fire died down, the new community leaders unveiled something small but powerful. A metal plaque embedded into a stone pedestal in the center of the park. It read, "In memory of the 11 lost, because safety should never be silenced. Rebuilt by the people of Cypress Run 2025. They handed me a small key after the ceremony. "It's for the new siren control," one of them said. "You should be the one to hold it." I didn't want to at first. But Emma nudged me. "You kept us safe before," she said. "You'll do it again." So I took the key. And I accepted what it meant. It didn't mean power. It meant responsibility. Now, whenever storm season comes, the town listens. Not to fearmongers or power-hungry board members, but to the wind, to the sky, to the science. To those who remember. Cypress Run is quieter now, but not in the dangerous way. It's a quieter born of awareness, a stillness earned. And every time the clouds start to gather, people check their alerts. They walk a little faster. They check on their neighbors. And they listen for the siren. The one we all built together. The one that will never be torn down again. A year had passed. The anniversary of the tornado came quietly, with the same uneasy stillness that had preceded the storm. But this time it was met with a community no longer asleep at the wheel. There were no planting contests, no HOA emails about mailbox paint codes. Instead, there was a candlelight vigil right in the heart of the park we rebuilt from nothing. I stood off to the side holding Emma's hand as soft music played from a portable speaker, and neighbors passed around tea lights whispering the names of those we'd lost. The Braddocks, little Danny from Pinecrest Lane, Madeline Kerr and her cat. People didn't just say the names, they remembered them now. We carried them like seeds in our pockets, something alive inside the quiet. Emma had grown in the last year, not just taller, but deeper. She asked fewer questions, but heard everything. She had written a short speech for the vigil. I didn't know she planned to read it until she gently pulled away from me and walked toward the portable microphone at the edge of the lawn. Her voice was clear. "My name is Emma Granger. I'm 10 years old. I live here." I didn't know most of the people who died last year, but now I think about them every day. I used to think being safe meant being quiet, but my dad taught me that sometimes the loudest thing you can do is protect someone, and I hope we always stay loud when it matters. The crowd was still as she stepped back clutching her note card like it was made of glass. Then the applause came gentle, sustained, real. I had never been prouder of her. Later that week, I was invited to speak at the state capitol as part of a newly formed HOA Oversight and Reform Committee, a group of legislators, engineers, emergency managers, and yes, even former HOA presidents now reformed by consequence. I stood at a podium in a modern glass building overlooking a city skyline that no longer looked so distant. But this time, I didn't speak about tragedy. I spoke about what came next, about what it meant to shift from merely surviving to actively protecting, about how every street in Oklahoma, every HOA, every cul-de-sac could take one step closer to real safety, to community care that wasn't just about rules and lawn heights, but about lives. I presented our new model, the Community Emergency Resilience Board we formed in Cypress Run. I showed them our budget, our disaster response protocols, our city-partnered siren grid. And I ended with this. No parent should ever be forced to choose between following a rule and protecting their child. No HOA should hold the power to strip away your right to survive. The loudest thing we can do now is remember and act before the sirens are ever needed. It was quiet after that. Not the fearful quiet from before, but the kind where people listen. When I returned home, there was a letter waiting for me in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper in neat, slanted handwriting. Dear Mr. Granger, I was one of the people who complained about your siren. I told Karen it was too loud and too ugly. But when the storm came, I didn't know where to go. My phone never buzzed. My husband and I barely made it to the closet in time. I think about that moment a lot now. Thank you for trying. I'm sorry we didn't listen. A neighbor. That night, I sat on the front steps with Emma, sipping lukewarm coffee, while she scrolled through her weather tracker app. You think we'll ever have to use the siren again? She asked. I looked at the sky, still painted with clouds that held no threat. I hope not, I said. But if we do, we'll be ready. She nodded. A breeze carried the distant sound of laughter from another yard. Kids playing with a garden hose, spraying each other, and screaming with joy. The same sound I used to hear before everything changed. Only now it felt earned. Later that summer, we held the first ever Community Preparedness Fair in the park. No more HOA rules. No more stares about who trimmed what hedge. Instead, we had booths for emergency kits, CPR demos, pet evacuation plans. Local meteorologists gave talks under tents, and storm shelter companies handed out brochures like candy. We even held a siren demo. Not the full volume, of course, but just enough for people to hear it, feel it. I watched as children covered their ears and laughed, while older residents nodded solemnly. The sound that once caused arguments was now a symbol of unity. Funny how things change. Helena Brooks was there too. She gave a speech and later pulled me aside. We're expanding the legal template from your case, she said. 3 more states are considering legislation. That fast? She smiled. When the stories are this loud, people listen. A few months later, I got a call from a woman in Kansas who said her HOA tried to remove her storm shutters. She cited the Granger Clause, said it stopped the board in their tracks. I didn't even know what to say. But that's when I realized my fight was never just about sirens. It was about voice, about presence, and reclaiming that presence from systems that were designed to keep people small, silent, and afraid of standing out. Emma and I now keep an emergency binder in our kitchen. It's laminated, color-coded, easy enough for her to understand alone. Not because I expect another disaster, but because I want her to feel ready. I want her to know she has the right to act, to speak up, to be loud when the world says shah. Our neighborhood has changed. We've changed. But the scars of what we lost will always live here, etched into the concrete foundations, the new growth pushing up through broken lots. The rebuilt homes that now all include storm shelters as standard. We don't call them eyesores anymore. We call them proof of survival, of learning, of a future shaped not by silence, but by sound. Every evening, just before sunset, I step outside and look up at the siren tower, now painted white and gold by the neighborhood kids who decorated it with drawings of lightning bolts and rainbows. And I listen, not for storms, but for the stillness that comes after the wind has passed, when you know you've done something that mattered. That saved someone. That echoed far beyond your own fence line. I am no longer just a man who lost his wife in a storm. I am now the man who made sure others didn't have to. The survivor who became a protector. And this time when the sky turns dark again, we'll be ready. We'll all be ready.